Hello and welcome to the Irish Pagan School YouTube channel. This is myself, Lora O'Brien, and I'm an author and co-founder at the Irish Pagan School. So we're here today because one of our community, our Tua, sent in a question through our mailing list for myself or John to answer. And this was Sarah, so thank you for your question, Sarah. And asked about ancestor altars. So what kind of items or iconography would be traditional to have on an ancestor altar here in Ireland? And I suppose I'll start off by saying that, traditionally we don't call them altars as such, but we do have a very strong death tradition here in Ireland. Everything from, the whole process around wakes and the burial ceremonies, really, the traditions, the culture when somebody actually dies, is quite involved and quite particular all over the island here. And it seems to be quite unusual for people who are not familiar with it. There's a little bit of culture shock the first time anybody is involved in the whole process of a death here in Ireland. So we also have a very strong tradition of tending graves, of marking their deaths. We have a thing called a month's mind, which is a Catholic practice particularly, but is very, very much community focused, I believe, in that it happens the month after a person dies, so the month after a funeral. Around then, the people will gather again for a mass and a kind of a check-in or a chat, really, with the family and with the friends of the person who has died. So all of that happens anyway. So, like I said, very strong death and burial traditions. If you want me to do a whole video on that, I can. Comment below, let me know. Or John will, one of us. And all that being said, when we do have, I suppose they'd be akin to like little shrines in the home that remembers our dead. And that can be anybody from your immediate ancestors to, people from a lot further back who you might want to honor. And we don't always, within the Irish pagan tradition that I work with, let's say, which is a very much an organic growth from the cultural traditions of Ireland and the native spirituality of Ireland, the mythology, all of that. We have a powerful connection, really, with not just blood ancestors. I have a whole class on your Irish ancestry at the Irish Pagan School if you want to go and have a look at that. But we also would work with and honor and respect and remember our social ancestors and our community ancestors and our spiritual ancestors, and there's a whole lot going on, really, as well as our physical bloodlines. You don't have to have a DNA cert that tells you that you are related to people on this island to practice Irish spirituality or Irish paganism. And that goes for ancestry and veneration of ancestors as well. If you decide that Carrie Fisher is a social or cultural or community ancestor that has been an inspiration to you and who you would want to remember and honor and respect after her passing, then I personally don't see anything wrong with that. It's not necessarily about Irish paganism, but Irish paganism is about ancestor veneration and traditions. So it does, it falls into the rough categories as far as I'm concerned. Now, what is on an altar then, or a shrine, that would remember your ancestors? Now that we've dealt with what and who your ancestors may be, whether they're Irish or not. So the obvious one is to put a picture, if you have a picture, right? If it is a person who you have lived memories of or who you have heard stories of, or if there is an access point to another family member that you could go and talk to, then absolutely do that and find out what their favorite things were, what their favorite foods were, what their favorite, what perfume did they wear, what activities did they enjoy doing. All of that is part of building relationship with ancestors. Now, I know that there's a whole Reiki out there who are like, well, I don't have access to that information for any number of reasons, or I don't, I don't know, they're too far back and I just want to honour my Irish ancestors. Now, I would put in my usual note of caution here. If you're honouring your Irish ancestors, you have to go very, very far back to find non-Christian ancestors. So if that's important to you, you want to be aware of that. My advice would be to just accept that you are dealing with Christian ancestors who may or may not approve of your modern pagan practices, because that is part of the relationship and that is part of dealing with them. So you put things on an ancestor altar that are important to that ancestor. And in such a case, this could be a crucifix. It could be one of those Holy Jesus pictures with the perpetual Sacred Heart red light shining on it, which were very, very common in Ireland when I was growing up. But thankfully, they're a little bit creepy. So thankfully, and of course they're white BG Jesus as well. But thankfully they have fallen out of favour somewhat here and hopefully elsewhere. So other children don't have to grow up with weird red light, Sacred Heart, BG Jesus like I did. Anyway, you have tools at your disposal. If you are comfortable with meditation or journeying practice, that is a very, very good way to contact your ancestors. And if you're not familiar with this, I would absolutely recommend that you learn a technique like that, because it is a very, very good way of receiving information back. A lot of communication in modern paganism seems to be one way, and divination seems to be one way of receiving information back, which is absolutely valid. But journeying or guided meditation practices, journeying in the Irish otherworld would be the technique that I personally teach and use. And that will, once you practice at it, don't expect fantastic results first time out. Like any skill, it must be practiced and learnt, and you need to be very comfortable with it. You need to be skilled in it to produce consistent, effective results. So once you have that practice in place, and it's going to be useful for contact with deity, for contact with ancestors, for contact with the she, if that's something that you want to incorporate into your practice, for finding information, for connecting to stories, mythology, places here in Ireland if you're not physically able to get here. So it is a really, really valuable skill to learn. And we do have a free class over at the Irish Pagan School, free meditation and journeying class. And there's also a bundle and a meditation membership full of guided meditations for all sorts of stuff, including visits to your ancestors. And there's more getting added there every single month for a very low cost membership if you want to go and check that out. But do take the classes as well to make sure that you have the foundations and the practice. Don't just dive in. I mean, you can, because the journeys are safe and they're designed to be safe, but to really, figure out, that'd be like, going over to the gym and starting on the machines without any kind of knowledge or experience about what's actually happening in your body, how nutrition might affect it, how muscles work, how, you need that context, right? So I would definitely recommend at the very least the free class, but there are a couple of classes that will give you a very good basis, and they're available in a bundle there at the Irish Pagan School. So anyway, journeying or meditation, or however you're doing it, praying and listening for guidance, or however your practice, however you do these things within your practice, there should be a way of doing these things, definitely. But however you do that, whether it's divination or any other means of communication or receiving communication back, you should absolutely engage with that for each ancestor that you would like to work with. And if it's a general kind of bundle o' ancestors, you can absolutely like throw out a net and see who you catch, or you can look for a more specific path. For example, try and contact an ancestor who would be sympathetic with your native Irish spiritual practices, just for example. So there's a lot to ancestor work. Like I said, there's a whole class over there at the Irish Pagan School, and there is, I believe on my blog, loraobrien.ie, I believe that you can go into the search function there and type in ancestors or ancestry, and I have at least one article, if not more, there as well. One of them, I'm pretty sure that article deals with ancestor altars as well, so you can have a look there. That's loraobrien.ie. And I'm going to leave that there for today. So just to recap really quickly, you want photographs. If you don't have a photograph of the person, then you can find a photograph of the place that you know that they came from. That would be good. Particularly if there's any kind of like old homestead or anything. Google Maps is your friend. You can zoom in and you can screen grab the exact place. If you know the townland, if you know the area that they were from, you can screen grab that, and that can take the place of a photograph of their physical face. I have a chatty Cathy's here behind the car having a little group confab, so sorry about that. So photographs, imagery, any items that would be sensory in particular, such as anything that would be a relevant smell or a food, a taste, or even a visual, any sound, if they had a particular musical instrument that they played, say for example, or if they had a if they like to go to a particular type of a dance or had a particular genre of music or an artist that they were very attached to, then you can absolutely put, play that when you're connecting, when you're praying, when you're working on building relationship. You could have those smells going, have those foods in place. All of those things would be, I suppose, fairly obvious, but maybe not. Anything that is going to connect you to that person. And again, if you don't have that information, I would highly recommend that you find that information, that you use some kind of method of receiving communication, however that looks like in your practice, such as guided journeying, guided meditation, divination. We do have an Om divination class as well at the Irish Pagan School. If you want a particularly Irish method of divination, you can learn that, and an introduction to Om class. So there are a lot of options for you, but you can start with just, if you don't have any of that information, you could literally put an image of Ireland on an altar and just begin to show up every day at that shrine, at that altar, and see what happens. See if anybody is willing to make space, and see if anybody is willing to come and communicate with you. So it does take time, it does take practice, it takes effort, it takes consistency. Like anything to do with Irish pagan practice, you need to show up consistently for this. Now, consistently might be once a week, it might be every day, it might be on a particular phase of the moon. Whatever that looks like for you, that's fine, but do it consistently, okay? So hopefully that's been helpful with regard to ancestor practice, ancestor altars, and figuring out your Irish ancestry from a spiritual perspective. So slán go fóill, and I will see you in the next video. Whoops.